Hello and welcome. Tonight, we're sailing into one of history's most misunderstood worlds. For hundreds of years, people have imagined pirates as fearless rebels who laughed in the face of kings, buried glittering treasure beneath lonely palm trees, and lived lives filled with endless adventure. Books, paintings, films, and legends have transformed them into larger-than-life heroes and villains. But what if almost everything you've heard is only part of the story? What if the real Golden Age of Piracy was far less glamorous, far more dangerous, and strangely more human than the legends ever admitted? Some of history's most famous pirates were not born criminals at all. Many had once sailed legally under royal flags. Others had served in powerful navies before peace suddenly left them unemployed. Some became pirates after being cheated of years of wages. Others simply found themselves trapped between starvation and survival. The truth is waiting beyond the horizon. Before we drift into tonight's history, I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from. What time is it where you are right now? Is it late evening, the quiet middle of the night, or perhaps the first peaceful hours before dawn? Leave a comment telling me your country and your local time. I genuinely enjoy reading where everyone is joining from. And if you enjoy slow, relaxing journeys through real history, don't forget to like this video and subscribe so you won't miss our next peaceful adventure into the past. Now, settle into a comfortable chair, pull your blanket a little closer, and let the noise of today slowly drift away. So, as the sea grows calm around us, let us quietly sail backward more than 3 centuries, toward an age when the Atlantic Ocean became the most dangerous stretch of water on Earth. Imagine standing on a weathered wooden dock in England during the late 17th century. The air smells of damp timber, fish, salt, smoke from nearby chimneys, and tar spread across the hulls of merchant vessels. Horses pull heavy wagons filled with barrels of beer, wool, rope, and supplies destined for distant colonies. Dockworkers shout over one another while gulls circle overhead, hoping scraps will fall into the harbor. At first glance, everything seems ordinary. Yet beneath this everyday activity, enormous political and economic changes are quietly reshaping the world. European empires are expanding faster than ever before. England, France, Spain, the Dutch Republic, and Portugal all compete fiercely for wealth across the Atlantic. Every month, merchant fleets carry sugar from the Caribbean, tobacco from Virginia, silver from Spanish America, spices from Asia, and enslaved Africans forced across the ocean through the horrific Atlantic slave trade. The oceans have become highways of global commerce. But those highways are poorly protected. A single merchant vessel might spend weeks or even months crossing open water with little chance of seeing help if danger appears. That danger comes in many forms. Storms, disease, navigation mistakes, shipwrecks, and increasingly, pirates. To understand why piracy exploded, we first need to understand the world that created it. During much of the 17th century, European powers fought nearly continuous wars against one another. Naval battles stretched across oceans. Governments desperately needed experienced sailors and armed ships. Instead of building enormous navies overnight, many governments turned to private citizens. They issued legal documents called letters of marque. These licenses allowed privately owned ships to attack enemy merchant vessels during wartime. The captains holding these commissions became known as privateers. Legally, they were not pirates. They captured enemy cargo, sold the ships through prize courts, and divided the profits among investors, officers, and crews. Some privateers became extremely wealthy. More importantly, thousands of ordinary sailors learned how to hunt ships. They mastered navigation. They practiced boarding actions. They fired cannons. They fought hand-to-hand battles. They spent years chasing valuable prizes across the Atlantic. Then something unexpected happened. Wars ended. Peace treaties were signed. Governments no longer needed thousands of armed private vessels. Suddenly, experienced sailors found themselves unemployed. The sea had taught them valuable skills. But peaceful trade offered much smaller wages than wartime prizes. Merchant captains often delayed payment for months. Food aboard commercial ships could be terrible. Discipline remained brutally harsh. Captains frequently used whips, ropes, and iron shackles to punish even small mistakes. A sailor might spend years risking his life only to return home nearly penniless. For many, legal work no longer seemed attractive. Piracy offered something that ordinary merchant service often did not. The possibility, though certainly not the guarantee, of greater earnings. Of course, the risks became vastly greater as well. A captured pirate usually faced execution. There were few second chances. Still, desperate men often make desperate decisions. The Caribbean became the perfect environment for this new wave of piracy. The islands scattered across warm blue waters created countless hidden anchorages. Tiny coves allowed ships to disappear almost overnight. Colonial governments often lacked enough soldiers or warships to patrol every coastline. Busy shipping routes passed directly through these waters, carrying some of the richest cargoes in the world: gold, silver, sugar, coffee, indigo, cocoa, silk. Even everyday supplies became valuable far from Europe. Pirates did not always seek treasure chests overflowing with jewels. Sometimes a cargo of food, fresh water, medicine, rope, sails, or gunpowder mattered even more. Survival often depended on practical supplies rather than glittering riches. Life aboard any sailing ship demanded constant labor. The romantic image of pirates lounging lazily on sunny decks rarely matched reality. Wooden ships never truly rested. Sails required repair. Rigging had to remain tight. Leaks constantly appeared below deck. Barnacles slowed the hull. Fresh water spoiled. Food rotted. Disease spread easily in cramped quarters. Every voyage demanded relentless maintenance. Even sleeping could become difficult. Storms ignored schedules. Night watches continued regardless of weather. A sailor might spend hours pumping water from the ship's bilge before climbing into a damp hammock for only a short rest. Morning simply brought another shift. The ocean never stopped demanding attention. And yet, despite every hardship, countless men continued choosing life at sea. Some sought fortune. Some escaped poverty. Some fled debt. Some simply knew no other profession. The Atlantic became filled with people carrying very different dreams but sharing the same uncertain horizon. Among them, slowly and quietly, emerged the first generation of pirates who would later become legendary. Not because they buried treasure. Not because they wore extravagant costumes. But because they challenged the greatest trading empires of their age in ways few ordinary people ever could. Most never imagined history would remember their names. Some never even expected to survive another year. As the 17th century drew toward its close, scattered pirate crews began appearing with increasing confidence throughout the Caribbean and along the eastern coast of North America. Ports whispered rumors before official reports arrived. Merchants became nervous. Insurance costs climbed. Governors exchanged anxious letters. Naval officers started hearing familiar names repeated from island to island. Something new was beginning. Not a single organized pirate kingdom. Not one grand conspiracy. Instead, dozens of independent crews, each making their own choices, slowly transforming scattered acts of robbery into what historians would later call the Golden Age of Piracy. None of them could yet know that within only a few years, the Atlantic Ocean would witness one of the most remarkable and short-lived eras in maritime history. Those scattered pirate crews would soon become far more than isolated criminals chasing opportunity. By the closing years of the 17th century, the Atlantic world was changing with surprising speed. European empires were growing richer through overseas trade, and that wealth had to travel across thousands of miles of open ocean. Every barrel of sugar harvested in the Caribbean, every shipment of tobacco packed in Virginia, every chest of silver leaving Spanish America, and every bale of cloth bound for the colonies depended upon wooden sailing ships. Those ships were remarkable achievements of craftsmanship, but they were also fragile. A broken mast, a violent hurricane, or a navigational mistake could doom an entire voyage. Even without pirates, the sea was already one of the most dangerous workplaces on Earth. Merchant sailors understood this reality well. Life aboard a merchant vessel rarely resembled the adventurous stories that later generations imagined. Days began before sunrise. The crew climbed rigging slick with rain and sea spray, reefed sails in fierce winds, scrubbed decks, repaired ropes, pumped leaking water from the hull, and hauled heavy cargo for hours without rest. Meals were simple and often disappointing. Salted beef became hard with age. Ship's biscuit, baked months earlier, frequently attracted insects. Fresh vegetables disappeared within the first weeks of a voyage. Drinking water, stored inside wooden casks, slowly developed unpleasant tastes as algae and bacteria multiplied. Scurvy haunted long voyages whenever fresh fruit and vegetables became unavailable. Today we know it results from a lack of vitamin C, but sailors of the time did not understand the true cause. Gums swelled painfully, teeth loosened, old wounds reopened, weakness spread throughout the body. Disease could kill more sailors than battle. Medical knowledge remained limited. A ship's surgeon often possessed only basic instruments and experience gained through trial and error. Minor injuries could become deadly infections. Fever spread rapidly among cramped crews sleeping only inches apart. Then there was discipline. Merchant captains wielded enormous authority. Many governed fairly, but others relied on fear. Flogging with a rope's end or the infamous cat-o'-nine-tails remained common punishments for theft, drunkenness, fighting, neglecting duty, or disobedience. Desertion could carry severe penalties as well. For ordinary sailors, the difference between serving under a respected captain and a cruel one could determine whether a voyage became merely difficult or utterly miserable. Against this background, pirate ships began offering something unusual, not comfort certainly, but often a different kind of organization. Many pirate crews adopted written agreements before beginning a voyage. Historians commonly refer to these as pirate articles or articles of agreement. Every crew established its own rules, but surviving examples reveal interesting patterns. The captain's authority, while important during battle, could be limited during ordinary sailing. Major decisions were often discussed among the crew. Loot was divided according to agreed shares rather than entirely at a captain's discretion. Compensation sometimes existed for serious injuries suffered in combat. A sailor who lost an arm or leg might receive additional shares of captured wealth. This was not modern democracy, nor was it equality in the way people understand today. Pirate life remained violent, dangerous, and illegal. Yet compared with the harsh hierarchy found aboard many merchant ships, these agreements offered some sailors a surprising degree of participation in their own fate. Of course, these arrangements should not be romanticized. Pirates could also be ruthless. Crews punished betrayal severely. Theft from fellow pirates could result in whipping, abandonment, or even execution depending on the circumstances. Maintaining discipline remained essential aboard any vessel operating far from civilization. One of the most important officers aboard many pirate ships was not the captain but the quartermaster. The quartermaster often represented the interests of the crew. He supervised the division of captured goods, settled disputes, distributed supplies, and sometimes acted as a balance against excessive authority by the captain. This division of responsibility differed from many merchant vessels, where captains exercised almost complete control. The structure reflected practical necessity. Pirates depended upon voluntary cooperation. If enough crew members lost confidence in their captain, they could sometimes replace him altogether. Success depended upon trust as much as fear. Another common misunderstanding concerns appearance. Modern illustrations frequently show every pirate dressed in colorful coats, extravagant hats decorated with feathers, shining boots, and expensive jewelry. Reality was usually far less dramatic. Most pirates wore practical clothing suitable for hard labor at sea. Loose shirts allowed movement while climbing rigging. Durable trousers resisted constant wear. Wide hats or knitted caps protected against sun and rain. Clothing often came from captured merchant cargo rather than fashionable tailoring. Some successful captains certainly owned fine coats or elegant pistols. But most ordinary pirates dressed much like the sailors from whom they had come. Weapons, however, were essential. Pirates preferred intimidation over lengthy battles whenever possible. Cannons damaged valuable cargo. Extended fighting injured potential recruits. Merchant captains often surrendered after realizing resistance would likely cost lives without changing the outcome. Boarding actions relied heavily upon pistols, cutlasses, boarding axes, muskets, and sheer determination. Black powder filled the air with thick smoke. Commands became difficult to hear. Wood splintered under musket fire. The close quarters of a ship's deck turned every encounter into chaos. Victory often depended less upon numbers than confidence, surprise, and reputation. Indeed, reputation became one of piracy's greatest weapons. A pirate captain known for showing mercy might receive quick surrender because merchant crews trusted they would survive. Conversely, a captain infamous for violence inspired immediate terror. Stories spread rapidly between ports. Sailors exchanged rumors in taverns from London to Boston, from Barbados to Jamaica. Some stories grew larger with every retelling. Others contained enough truth to influence real decisions on distant oceans. Flags also played an important role. The famous black pirate flag associated today with nearly every pirate did exist in several forms, although no single universal design represented all crews. Many captains created their own distinctive banners. Some displayed skeletons. Others included hourglasses, hearts, swords, or spears. The message remained unmistakable. Surrender quickly, and your chances of survival improve. Resist, and consequences may become far worse. Sometimes pirates approached under ordinary national flags before revealing their true identity only moments before attack. Deception often proved more effective than speed alone. Weather itself constantly shaped every decision. Unlike modern vessels powered by engines, sailing ships depended entirely upon the wind. Calm seas could halt progress for days. Storms might scatter fleets across hundreds of miles. Experienced navigators studied clouds, changing air pressure, wave patterns, and shifting winds with remarkable attention. The sea rewarded observation, punished carelessness. Even successful pirate captains spent far more time searching for suitable targets than actually capturing them. Weeks might pass without finding a valuable prize. Food supplies dwindled. Fresh water required constant management. Crew morale became increasingly difficult to maintain. Every unsuccessful voyage increased pressure to seize the next opportunity. Meanwhile, colonial governors watched these developments with growing concern. Reports arrived from merchants describing attacks along busy shipping lanes. Insurance rates rose steadily. Naval patrols expanded where resources allowed. Yet the Atlantic remained enormous. Countless islands, reefs, hidden coves, and isolated anchorages provided temporary refuge for ships seeking to disappear. The geography itself often favored those who knew its waters well. Among these islands lay one place that would soon become deeply connected with pirate history. It was not an empire. It was not a mighty fortress. It was a recovering settlement struggling to rebuild after years of conflict. Its name was Nassau, on New Providence Island in the Bahamas. Within only a few years, that modest harbor would become one of the most famous gathering places in pirate history, attracting experienced sailors, ambitious captains, escaped seamen, and men whose names would eventually echo through history books for centuries to come. Nassau did not look like the capital of an outlaw world. Anyone arriving by sea around the opening years of the 18th century would first notice the brilliant blue water surrounding New Providence Island. The harbor itself was naturally protected by reefs and shallow channels that larger warships found difficult to navigate. Palm trees swayed gently in the warm breeze, while clusters of wooden houses stood close to the shoreline. Smoke drifted lazily from cooking fires, and small fishing boats moved quietly across the calm water. At first glance, it appeared to be another modest colonial settlement. Yet appearances often hid a very different reality. During the closing years of the 17th century, Nassau had suffered repeated attacks. Wars between European powers reached even these distant islands. Spanish and French forces raided settlements across the Caribbean, destroying buildings and weakening local government. Many officials left. Soldiers became scarce. Defenses fell into disrepair. When government authority faded, opportunity appeared. Pirates did not conquer Nassau through a single dramatic battle. Instead, they gradually made use of a place where royal control had become weak. Ships needing repairs found sheltered anchorages. Crews could obtain fresh water, timber, food, and occasionally willing merchants prepared to purchase captured goods without asking too many uncomfortable questions. The harbor became something rare. It was a place where pirates could rest. Not safely, because danger never truly disappeared, but with fewer immediate threats than many other ports. As more crews arrived, Nassau developed a reputation that spread across the Atlantic. A sailor in London might hear stories about it while drinking in a riverside tavern. Dockworkers in Bristol exchanged rumors of successful captains returning with pockets full of Spanish silver. Merchant officers in Boston warned one another that pirates were gathering in the Bahamas. Every retelling added another layer to the legend. Reality remained more complicated. Nassau was not overflowing with unimaginable riches. Many pirates arrived nearly broke after unsuccessful voyages. Ships constantly required repairs. Hulls leaked. Rigging wore out under relentless wind and salt water. Sails tore during storms. Powder and shot had to be replaced. Food and fresh water disappeared quickly whenever large crews came ashore. Money flowed into Nassau. Money also flowed right back out again. Taverns quickly became some of the busiest places in town. For sailors who had spent weeks or months surrounded only by endless sea, solid ground felt almost unreal. Warm meals replaced salted rations. Music echoed through crowded rooms. Ale, rum, and conversation filled the evenings. Information became just as valuable as drink. Which merchant fleets had recently sailed? Where had Spanish treasure ships been sighted? Which governors were increasing naval patrols? Which islands remained poorly defended? Every conversation might contain useful intelligence. Some information proved accurate. Some was nothing more than hopeful exaggeration. Pirates, like merchants, often relied upon rumor long before reliable news reached distant ports. One remarkable feature of pirate society during these years was how international it became. The crews were not composed entirely of English sailors. Men came from Scotland, Ireland, Wales, France, the Dutch Republic, Sweden, Portugal, and many other places. Some had once served aboard Spanish ships. Others had escaped harsh conditions in merchant fleets or naval service. Languages mixed together on crowded docks. Accents from across Europe could be heard within the same tavern. The sea ignored many political borders that governments fought so fiercely to defend. There were also free black sailors and formerly enslaved men among pirate crews. Historians have found evidence that some pirates of African descent served as experienced seamen, gunners, navigators, and fighting crew members. Their experiences varied greatly from ship to ship, and piracy certainly did not erase the brutal reality of slavery that dominated the Atlantic world. In fact, the Golden Age of Piracy unfolded alongside one of history's greatest human tragedies, the transatlantic slave trade. European empires transported millions of African men, women, and children across the Atlantic under horrific conditions. Enslaved people became essential to plantation economies producing sugar, tobacco, rice, and other profitable goods. Pirates sometimes attacked slave ships. Occasionally they freed captives. In other cases, they forced skilled individuals to join their own crews. There were also instances where pirates sold captured enslaved people themselves. The historical record shows no simple pattern. Pirates challenged governments and commerce, but they were not consistent opponents of slavery. Like much of history, the truth remains morally complicated and often deeply uncomfortable. Meanwhile, European governments watched Nassau with increasing alarm. Merchant complaints multiplied every year. Insurance companies demanded higher premiums. Colonial governors sent worried reports back across the Atlantic. Trade represented enormous wealth. Any threat to that trade quickly attracted political attention. Still, eliminating piracy proved much easier on paper than in practice. The Caribbean stretched across thousands of islands, reefs, bays, and hidden anchorages. Even powerful navies struggled to patrol such an enormous region continuously. Royal Navy ships possessed superior firepower. Pirates usually possessed superior local knowledge. Experienced captains memorized dangerous reefs where pursuing warships hesitated to follow. They understood seasonal winds, hidden channels, and isolated beaches where ships could be careened onto their sides for repairs before disappearing once more into open water. Nature itself often became their ally. Hurricanes represented one of the greatest dangers in the Caribbean. Modern forecasting did not exist. Sailors relied entirely upon observation. Darkening skies, unusual swells, heavy humid air, sudden shifts in wind. Sometimes these signs provided enough warning. Sometimes they did not. Entire fleets vanished beneath towering waves. Ships smashed against coral reefs. Masts snapped like dry branches. Cargo scattered across coastlines. Storms cared little whether a vessel belonged to merchants, navies, or pirates. Survival demanded equal respect from everyone. Life ashore remained uncertain as well. Pirates spent surprisingly little of their lives enjoying leisure. Ships required constant attention. Carpenters replaced damaged planks. Blacksmiths repaired anchors and fittings. Sailmakers stitched enormous canvas sheets by hand. Ropemakers twisted fresh lines from hemp fibers. Every successful voyage depended upon skilled craftsmen whose work rarely appeared in heroic legends. Without them, no ship could remain seaworthy for long. As Nassau's reputation grew, another important development quietly unfolded. Pirate captains began forming loose personal connections. These were not permanent alliances. Competition remained fierce. Different crews often pursued the same prizes. Arguments occurred over captured ships, supplies, and territory. Yet familiar faces appeared repeatedly in the harbor. Captains exchanged news. Sometimes they sailed together temporarily. Occasionally they celebrated shared victories. These relationships helped create the impression of a larger pirate community, even though no single leader ruled them all. Perhaps the greatest misconception about piracy is the idea that pirates lived long lives filled with endless success. The opposite was usually true. Most pirate careers lasted only a few years. Disease claimed many lives. Storms destroyed ships. Naval patrols captured crews. Accidents occurred constantly aboard wooden sailing vessels. A single musket ball, infected wound, or hurricane could end everything without warning. Very few pirates retired peacefully with hidden fortunes. Many died before reaching middle age. Yet despite these overwhelming risks, new recruits continued arriving. The possibility of one successful prize remained enough to tempt desperate sailors. Some hoped to escape cruel captains. Others sought quick wealth. Many simply believed they had little left to lose. It was within this restless, uncertain world that a handful of extraordinary figures began rising above hundreds of ordinary pirates. Their reputations spread from harbor to harbor, until even children in Europe heard their names whispered in stories. One of the first to achieve that remarkable fame was a Welsh sailor whose courage, recklessness, and astonishing fortune would earn him a nickname remembered more than 3 centuries later. His real name was John Roberts. History would know him as Black Bart. John Roberts never intended to become one of history's most successful pirates. In fact, when he first crossed the Atlantic, piracy was probably the last future he imagined for himself. He was born in Wales around 1682, in a small coastal community where the sea shaped everyday life. Like many boys growing up near the water, Roberts learned about ships from an early age. Merchant vessels constantly arrived and departed, carrying cargo, sailors, and stories from distant parts of the world. For ambitious young men, the sea offered one of the few paths toward steady employment. By his teenage years, Roberts had begun working aboard merchant ships. Unlike many sailors who struggled to learn navigation, Roberts quickly earned a reputation for competence. He understood discipline, navigation, and the complicated routines required to keep a ship operating safely across the Atlantic. Fellow sailors respected his abilities, and captains valued his experience. Nothing suggested he would become an outlaw. Then history took an unexpected turn. In 1719, Roberts was serving aboard a British slave ship named Princess. Like many merchant vessels of its day, the ship participated in the transatlantic slave trade, transporting enslaved Africans under horrific conditions. It was one part of a vast commercial system that generated enormous profits for European merchants while inflicting immeasurable suffering on millions of people. Near the coast of West Africa, the Princess encountered pirates. The attacking vessel belonged to Howell Davis, another Welsh pirate captain whose reputation was steadily growing. Davis and his crew captured the ship with surprising speed. Captured sailors usually faced difficult choices. Some remained prisoners. Some were released. Others, especially experienced navigators and officers, were strongly encouraged, or forced to join pirate crews. Roberts found himself among those selected. According to later accounts, he did not embrace piracy willingly. He reportedly disliked the idea of becoming a criminal and understood the risks involved. Pirates lived under constant threat of execution if captured. Their careers were often short, violent, and uncertain. Yet refusing experienced pirates at sea was rarely a practical option. Roberts joined Davis's crew. For several weeks, he observed pirate life from within. He watched how decisions were made, how prizes were captured, and how discipline differed from that aboard many merchant ships. His knowledge of navigation quickly attracted attention. Then another unexpected event changed everything. Only weeks after Roberts joined the crew, Howell Davis attempted to deceive Portuguese officials while approaching the island of Principe, off the coast of Central Africa. The plan failed disastrously. Portuguese defenders recognized the danger and opened fire. Davis was killed. Suddenly, the crew found themselves without their captain. Pirate crews often elected new leaders rather than automatically promoting officers by rank. They valued courage, experience, and the confidence of fellow sailors. Although Roberts had been aboard only a short time, many recognized his remarkable abilities. To the surprise of nearly everyone, including Roberts himself, the crew elected him captain. According to the 18th-century writer Captain Charles Johnson, Roberts reportedly remarked that if he had to choose between serving as a common pirate or leading one, he preferred command. Whether those exact words were spoken remains uncertain, but they captured the reality of his situation. Once elected, Roberts transformed into an extraordinarily effective pirate leader. Over the next several years, he commanded multiple ships across the Atlantic, the Caribbean, the coast of Africa, and even waters near Newfoundland. His career became astonishing not because it lasted long, it did not, but because of the sheer number of vessels he captured. Historians estimate that Roberts and his crews seized well over 400 ships. That figure made him one of the most successful pirates of the entire Golden Age. His strategy relied upon careful planning rather than reckless aggression. Roberts understood shipping routes. He studied seasonal trade patterns. He knew where merchant vessels were likely to appear and when they would be most vulnerable. Patience often produced better results than chasing every distant sail on the horizon. Unlike the dramatic sea battles portrayed in many films, successful piracy frequently depended upon psychology. A merchant captain seeing Roberts's ship approach often faced an impossible calculation. Fight risking the lives of crew and passengers, or surrender and hope for mercy. Many chose surrender. Every battle avoided meant fewer injuries, less damage, and a greater chance of preserving valuable cargo. Roberts also maintained strict discipline aboard his ships. Surviving pirate articles associated with his crews reveal detailed rules. Gambling for money was restricted. Weapons had to remain clean and ready. Lights were extinguished at certain hours to reduce fire hazards. Musicians received a day of rest on Sundays unless circumstances demanded otherwise. Arguments were expected to be settled under agreed conditions rather than erupting into constant violence. These rules reflected practical necessity. A pirate ship at sea could not function amid endless disorder. Order increased survival. Even clothing reflected Roberts's growing reputation. Several historical accounts describe him wearing richly embroidered coats and crimson waistcoats during important occasions. Some descriptions mention a red feather in his hat and a gold chain around his neck. Whether every detail is perfectly accurate remains debated among historians, but Roberts clearly understood the power of appearance. A confident, well-dressed captain projected authority. His reputation often reached merchant crews before his cannons ever came into range. Yet beneath the impressive clothing remained constant danger. The British Royal Navy intensified efforts to suppress piracy. Governments had grown increasingly determined to restore secure trade routes. Warships hunted famous captains relentlessly. Colonial governors offered rewards. Captured pirates faced highly publicized trials intended to discourage others. Every successful voyage increased Roberts's fame, but also increased the determination of authorities to capture him. Meanwhile, life aboard pirate ships continued to demand relentless labor. The ocean cared nothing for reputations. Storms tore sails without warning. Wooden hulls leaked constantly. Fresh water spoiled in tropical heat. Crew members suffered injuries while climbing towering masts during rough weather. Long periods passed without finding valuable prizes. Food occasionally became scarce. Even highly successful captains could not escape these realities. Despite popular legends, there was no permanent pirate paradise. No hidden island overflowing with limitless treasure. Every captured prize had to be divided. Ships required repairs. Gunpowder had to be replaced. Clothing wore out. Medicine remained limited. Money disappeared surprisingly quickly. Many pirates spent fortunes almost as rapidly as they acquired them. Another persistent myth involves buried treasure. Stories of pirates hiding enormous chests filled with gold became especially popular during the 19th century, long after the Golden Age had ended. In reality, historians have found very little evidence that famous pirates routinely buried their wealth. The explanation is simple. Most stolen goods were not piles of gold coins. Cargo often consisted of sugar, cocoa, tobacco, cloth, timber, rope, spices, or manufactured goods. These items had to be sold quickly. Even coins were usually divided among the crew rather than hidden underground for years. A pirate constantly pursued by naval patrols had little reason to bury wealth. He might never safely return to collect. As Roberts continued his remarkable career, his confidence grew. He defeated numerous merchant vessels and repeatedly escaped capture. Each successful voyage strengthened his legend across the Atlantic world. Merchants dreaded hearing reports that Black Bart had been sighted nearby. Insurance companies feared him. Colonial governors cursed his name in official correspondence. Young sailors, meanwhile, heard tales of his victories in crowded taverns and wondered whether fortune truly favored those bold enough to risk everything. But history has a habit of reminding even its most successful figures that luck rarely lasts forever. Far out on the Atlantic, a heavily armed Royal Navy warship was already searching for him. Its captain had received clear orders: find John Roberts, end his career, and restore the king's authority to the sea. The warship searching for John Roberts did not rely on luck alone. By the early 1720s, the British government had reached an important conclusion. Individual pirate captains could no longer be dismissed as isolated criminals. Together, they had disrupted trade across the Atlantic, frightened merchants, increased insurance costs, and embarrassed one of the world's most powerful naval nations. Something had to change. The Royal Navy began expanding its anti-piracy patrols. Experienced captains received orders to hunt the most notorious pirate leaders wherever they could be found. colonial governors cooperated more closely than they had in previous years. Merchant captains were encouraged to report pirate sightings immediately, while naval vessels gathered intelligence from ports scattered across the Caribbean and the coast of West Africa. Among the officers entrusted with this difficult mission was Captain Chaloner Ogle. He commanded the HMS Swallow, a well-armed warship built for speed as well as combat. Unlike slow merchant ships burdened with heavy cargo, the Swallow could pursue pirates over long distances. Still, finding a pirate on the Atlantic Ocean remained an extraordinary challenge. The sea covered millions of square miles. A pirate captain might change course within hours after receiving fresh information from another vessel. Hidden bays, river mouths, and isolated islands offered temporary shelter. Wind direction often determined where ships could travel, making every pursuit unpredictable. Meanwhile, John Roberts continued operating with remarkable confidence. His success had perhaps made him a little too comfortable. By early 1722, Roberts and his crew were cruising near the coast of West Africa, an area where European merchant ships regularly carried valuable cargo. Gold, ivory, textiles, and enslaved Africans moved through these waters as part of expanding international trade networks. Roberts had captured so many vessels during his career that some sailors believed his luck could never end. History, however, often changes in a single morning. On the 5th of February 1722, Roberts' fleet lay anchored near Cape Lopez, in present-day Gabon. The weather appeared favorable. The sea was relatively calm. Nothing suggested that the day's routine would become one of the defining moments of the Golden Age of Piracy. Then a sail appeared on the horizon. At first, Roberts' men believed it to be another merchant vessel. Capturing isolated merchant ships had become almost routine for them. But appearances proved deceptive. Captain Ogle had anticipated exactly this kind of misunderstanding. The HMS Swallow approached carefully, disguising its intentions long enough to gain a tactical advantage. When the truth became clear, precious time had already been lost. Confusion spread across the pirate fleet. Some ships attempted to organize. Others prepared for battle. Still others struggled to understand what was happening. Roberts had faced danger many times before. He chose to fight. Historical accounts describe him dressing in some of his finest clothing before the battle. He reportedly wore a crimson waistcoat beneath an elegant coat, with a diamond cross hanging from a gold chain around his neck. Whether every detail was recorded perfectly is impossible to know. But the image became symbolic. A pirate captain facing his greatest challenge not in worn working clothes, but with deliberate confidence. The two ships closed the distance. Cannons roared. Dense clouds of black powder smoke drifted across the water. Wood splintered as iron cannonballs smashed into hulls and rigging. The noise would have been overwhelming. Shouted commands, crashing timbers, snapping ropes, and the deep thunder of naval artillery echoing across the sea. Unlike many earlier encounters, this opponent refused to surrender. The Royal Navy had come prepared. Very early in the fighting, tragedy struck the pirate crew. A burst of grapeshot, a devastating anti-personnel ammunition fired from naval cannon, swept across the deck. John Roberts was hit. He died almost instantly. According to several contemporary accounts, his crew quickly wrapped his body in sailcloth and carried out his own standing order. He had instructed them never to allow his body to fall into enemy hands. They committed his remains to the sea. Within moments, one of history's most successful pirates had vanished beneath the Atlantic Ocean. There would be no grand funeral, no marked grave, only the endless water stretching toward every horizon. Without Roberts, resistance quickly weakened. The Swallow eventually defeated the remaining pirates. Many crew members surrendered. Others attempted to escape but failed. The aftermath reflected the harsh realities of 18th-century justice. Hundreds of captured pirates and suspected accomplices faced trial. Some were acquitted. Many received prison sentences. Dozens were sentenced to death. Executions served not only as punishment but also as public warnings. Colonial governments hoped that visible justice would discourage others from choosing piracy. Whether it worked immediately is another question. Even after Roberts' death, piracy did not disappear overnight. Other captains still sailed the Atlantic. Some had already become famous. Others were only beginning their careers. Yet historians often view Roberts' defeat as an important turning point. The Golden Age of Piracy had reached its peak. From this point forward, governments increasingly gained the upper hand. The combination of stronger naval patrols, improved international cooperation, and harsher enforcement gradually narrowed the opportunities pirates had once exploited. Still, the story of piracy cannot be understood through Roberts alone. His career represented only one path into that dangerous world. Other famous pirates came from remarkably different backgrounds. Some were charismatic. Some were ruthless. Some relied more upon reputation than violence. Among them was perhaps the most recognizable pirate in popular culture. His appearance became legendary. Long dark beard. Slow-burning fuses woven into his hair during battle. A towering figure surrounded by smoke. His real name was Edward Teach, or perhaps Edward the Che, as contemporary records spell it in several different ways. History remembers him by a name that still inspires curiosity more than 300 years later. Blackbeard. Long before his name became surrounded by myth, Edward Teach was simply another experienced sailor trying to earn a living on the Atlantic. Much about his early life remains uncertain, and historians are careful not to claim details that surviving records cannot prove. It is widely believed that he was born around 1680, probably in Bristol, England, one of the busiest ports in the British Isles. Bristol was a city where ships constantly arrived from North America, the Caribbean and Africa. Young boys growing up near its crowded docks learned about the sea almost as naturally as they learned to walk. If Teach did grow up there, he would have watched merchant vessels loaded with tobacco, sugar, timber, and manufactured goods. He would also have seen ships connected to the transatlantic slave trade, one of the darkest and most profitable businesses of the 18th century. The Atlantic economy was expanding rapidly, but its wealth came at an enormous human cost. Like many sailors of his generation, Teach probably gained valuable experience during the War of the Spanish Succession, which lasted from 1701 to 1714. During those years, Britain issued hundreds of letters of marque, allowing private ships to attack enemy commerce legally. Many men who later became pirates first learned naval warfare as privateers. When peace arrived in 1714, thousands of skilled seamen suddenly found themselves unemployed. Merchant wages remained low. Work was uncertain. The temptation to continue attacking ships without official permission became stronger for many experienced crews. Teach appears to have entered piracy during this uncertain period. His first major association was with Benjamin Hornigold, one of the earliest successful pirate captains based around Nassau. Hornigold had built a reputation as an effective leader who preyed largely upon ships belonging to Britain's rivals. Ironically, he reportedly refused to attack British vessels for quite some time, believing himself still loyal to the crown despite operating as a pirate. Teach served under Hornigold and learned from him. He observed how successful pirate captains selected targets, managed crews, and avoided unnecessary battles. He also learned something equally important. Fear could become a weapon. Eventually, Hornigold entrusted Teach with command of his own vessel. Now Edward Teach no longer followed another captain. Others followed him. His greatest prize soon appeared almost by accident. In late 1717, Teach captured a large French slave ship called La Concorde near the Caribbean island of Martinique. Before its capture, the vessel had transported enslaved Africans across the Atlantic under horrific conditions. Disease had already claimed many lives during the voyage, leaving both crew and captives exhausted. Teach recognized the ship's potential immediately. He renamed it Queen Anne's Revenge. It became one of the most powerful pirate ships operating during the Golden Age. Armed with approximately 40 cannons after modifications, it greatly outgunned most merchant vessels. Its size allowed it to carry a large crew while intimidating nearly every commercial ship that crossed its path. Yet surprisingly, Blackbeard's greatest strength was not firepower alone. It was psychology. Contemporary descriptions portray him as a tall, imposing man with an enormous black beard that reached across his chest. During battles, he reportedly tied slow-burning fuses beneath his hat or into his beard. As the smoke drifted around his face, witnesses described him as looking almost supernatural. Imagine being an ordinary merchant sailor. You have spent weeks crossing the Atlantic. Food is running low. Your crew is tired. Then, through the morning mist, a large armed vessel appears. Its captain stands at the front, surrounded by curling smoke, dressed with pistols across his chest, staring silently toward your ship. Whether every detail of later descriptions is perfectly accurate matters less than one important historical fact. His reputation spread rapidly, and reputation often ended battles before the first cannon fired. Many merchant captains surrendered immediately after recognizing Blackbeard's flag. Resistance could cost lives. Surrender usually offered better odds of survival. Contrary to popular legend, Blackbeard did not massacre every crew he encountered. Historical evidence suggests that he often relied upon intimidation rather than unnecessary violence. Dead sailors could not reveal stories that enhanced his terrifying image. Survivors, however, carried those stories from port to port. Each retelling made his legend larger. Every frightened witness became part of his strategy. During 1718, Blackbeard carried out one of the boldest operations of the entire Golden Age of Piracy. He sailed directly toward Charlestown, today's Charleston, South Carolina. Rather than attacking the town itself, he blockaded its harbor. For nearly a week, ships attempting to enter or leave were intercepted. Passengers, merchants, and even prominent local citizens suddenly found themselves prisoners. The blockade shocked colonial authorities. Here was a pirate openly controlling one of Britain's important American ports. Yet Blackbeard's demands surprised many observers. Instead of requesting mountains of gold or silver, he demanded a chest of medicine. That request reminds us how difficult life at sea truly was. Disease constantly threatened every crew. Medicines, however limited 18th century medicine actually was, could prove more valuable than treasure. Eventually, local officials supplied the requested medical chest. The prisoners were released. Blackbeard sailed away. The incident embarrassed colonial governments across British America. If one pirate could close an important harbor so easily, what prevented others from doing the same? The pressure to eliminate piracy intensified once again. Not long afterward, another unexpected event occurred. In June 1718, Queen Anne's Revenge ran aground near Beaufort Inlet, along the coast of present-day North Carolina. Historians continue debating exactly why. Some believe it was an accident caused by difficult navigation through shallow waters. Others suggest Blackbeard intentionally grounded the ship to reduce the size of his crew and increase the remaining shares of future loot. The surviving evidence cannot settle the question completely. What is certain is that the great flagship was lost. Today, archaeologists have recovered thousands of artifacts from its wreck site, including cannon, anchors, medical instruments, navigational tools, and everyday objects used by sailors. These discoveries have helped historians better understand daily life aboard pirate vessels, replacing myth with physical evidence resting beneath the sea for more than 3 centuries. After losing his flagship, Blackbeard accepted a royal pardon offered by Governor Charles Eden of North Carolina. King George I had authorized pardons for pirates willing to abandon their criminal careers. Some accepted sincerely. Others returned to piracy soon afterward. Blackbeard's intentions remain debated. For a short time, he appeared willing to live peacefully. Yet suspicion followed him everywhere. Merchants believed he continued illegal activities. Colonial officials questioned his loyalty. Neighboring governors grew increasingly frustrated that such a famous pirate seemed beyond their reach. Among those determined to stop him was Alexander Spotswood, the governor of Virginia. Although Blackbeard operated mainly outside Spotswood's own colony, the governor decided that waiting was too dangerous. He secretly organized an expedition. 2 small naval vessels received orders to find Blackbeard wherever he could be located. Their commander was a young Royal Navy lieutenant named Robert Maynard. Their meeting would become one of the most famous confrontations in pirate history, and it would unfold not on the open Atlantic, but in the quiet, shallow waters of a narrow North Carolina inlet, where strategy would matter far more than the size of a ship. The waters around Ocracoke Inlet appeared almost peaceful on the morning of November 22, 1718. The wind was light. Small waves rolled gently toward the sandy shoreline, and the narrow channels between the barrier islands looked quiet enough for fishermen rather than soldiers. Few people awake that morning could have imagined that one of the most famous encounters in maritime history was only hours away. Blackbeard had anchored nearby with a relatively small crew. Unlike the enormous fleet sometimes imagined in popular stories, he no longer commanded dozens of ships. After the loss of Queen Anne's Revenge, his operations had become much smaller. He was sailing aboard the sloop Adventure, a fast and maneuverable vessel that suited the shallow coastal waters of North Carolina. His confidence, however, remained as large as ever. For months, rumors had spread that he enjoyed the protection of certain local officials. Whether those relationships were entirely corrupt or simply the result of weak colonial government is still debated by historians, but Blackbeard clearly believed he had enough influence to avoid immediate arrest. He was mistaken. Lieutenant Robert Maynard had been given very specific instructions. Find Edward Teach. Capture him if possible. Kill him if necessary. Maynard's expedition differed from many naval operations of the time. Rather than using a large warship that would struggle through the shallow inlet, he commanded 2 smaller sloops. They carried fewer cannons than Blackbeard's vessel, but their shallow draft allowed them to navigate waters that larger ships could not safely enter. Even so, the approach was dangerous. As Maynard's force moved closer, Blackbeard quickly realized these were not ordinary merchant vessels. The pirate captain prepared for battle. The tide complicated everything. Both sides struggled with sandbanks hidden just beneath the surface. Navigation required constant attention. A single mistake could leave a ship stranded, unable to maneuver while enemy cannon found easy targets. That is exactly what nearly happened. One of Maynard's vessels grounded temporarily. Blackbeard immediately recognized the opportunity. He ordered his guns to fire. The broadside struck with devastating effect. Wood exploded into splinters. Smoke covered the water. Several sailors were killed instantly, while many others were wounded. For a moment, it appeared that Blackbeard might escape once again. But Maynard refused to withdraw. Instead, he relied upon a clever piece of deception. Knowing that Blackbeard expected to overwhelm his crew during a boarding action, Maynard ordered many of his sailors to move below deck. From a distance, his vessel appeared almost deserted. To Blackbeard it looked like victory. Confident that the enemy had been broken, he brought the Adventure alongside. Pirates rushed across the narrow gap between the ships. Pistols fired. Cutlasses flashed. Axes struck wooden rails. Within seconds, fierce hand-to-hand combat erupted across the crowded deck. Then Maynard gave the signal. His hidden sailors burst upward from below deck. Suddenly, Blackbeard's men found themselves facing far more opponents than they had expected. The battle became chaotic. There was little room to maneuver. Smoke from gunpowder drifted through the air, making it difficult to see clearly. Men slipped on wet planks stained by seawater and blood. Muskets were fired at close range before combat quickly turned to swords, knives, and pistol butts. According to contemporary accounts, Blackbeard fought with extraordinary determination. He had spent years building a fearsome reputation, and now his own survival depended entirely upon his skill. Lieutenant Maynard later reported that the 2 men confronted one another directly. They exchanged pistol shots. Then they closed with swords. The fighting was fierce enough that Maynard's blade reportedly broke during the struggle. Other sailors joined the desperate melee surrounding the two leaders. Historical reports describe Blackbeard receiving numerous wounds before finally collapsing. One of the earliest published accounts claimed that his body bore 5 gunshot wounds and more than 20 sword cuts. Whether every number is perfectly accurate cannot be confirmed, but there is little doubt that he fought until he could fight no longer. Edward Teach, Blackbeard, was dead. His career had lasted only a few years. Yet in that brief time, he had become one of the most recognizable names in maritime history. Maynard faced one remaining problem. He needed proof. Pirates often became surrounded by rumors after their deaths. False reports circulated regularly across the Atlantic. Colonial authorities wanted undeniable evidence that the notorious captain had truly been killed. Maynard ordered Blackbeard's head removed. It was suspended from the bowsprit of his vessel during the return voyage to Virginia. Today that image may seem shocking, but in the early 18th century such displays served a clear purpose. Governments wanted everyone who saw the ship entering harbor to understand that one of Britain's most wanted pirates would never sail again. Stories soon began growing around Blackbeard's death. Some claimed his headless body swam around the ship several times before sinking beneath the waves. Others insisted that his ghost haunted Ocracoke Inlet on quiet nights. These tales belong to folklore rather than documented history. Like many legendary figures, Blackbeard's reputation continued expanding long after his life had ended. Reality, however, was dramatic enough without supernatural additions. His death marked another important victory for Britain's campaign against piracy. Merchants celebrated. Colonial governors praised Maynard's success. Newspapers carried reports across the Atlantic. The message was unmistakable. Even the most famous pirate could be defeated. Yet piracy itself remained alive. Other captains still operated across the Caribbean and Atlantic. Some avoided publicity. Others deliberately sought it. Among them sailed a very different kind of pirate. He did not cultivate a terrifying appearance like Blackbeard. He did not command as many captures as Black Bart Roberts. Instead, he became famous for something much quieter. His reputation rested on patience, intelligence, careful navigation, and remarkable restraint. His name was Samuel Bellamy, later remembered as Black Sam Bellamy. Unlike many pirates who inspired fear above all else, Bellamy would become known in later accounts as one of the few captains who often preferred mercy over unnecessary violence. His story, however, would end not through battle with the Royal Navy, but through one of the oldest and most powerful enemies every sailor feared far more than any pirate: the sea itself. Long before people remembered him as Black Sam Bellamy, Samuel Bellamy was simply a young English sailor searching for opportunity in a world where fortune often seemed to belong only to the wealthy. Most historians believe he was born around 1689 in the county of Devon, England, a region whose long coastline had produced generations of fishermen, merchants, naval officers, and explorers. Like countless young men living near the sea, Bellamy grew up watching ships disappear beyond the horizon, carrying dreams of distant lands and the possibility of a better life. England in the late 17th century was changing rapidly. Trade was expanding. Colonies were growing. The Atlantic connected Europe with North America, the Caribbean, Africa, and beyond. Every voyage promised profit for merchants, but for ordinary sailors, life remained uncertain. Wages were often delayed. Food was poor. Work was dangerous. Bellamy eventually crossed the Atlantic to the American colonies, where later stories claimed he fell in love with a young woman named Maria Hallett, who lived near Cape Cod in present-day Massachusetts. The romance became one of piracy's most famous legends. According to local tradition, Maria came from a respectable family that disapproved of Bellamy because he possessed little wealth. Determined to earn enough money to marry her, Bellamy supposedly turned toward treasure hunting and eventually piracy. It is an appealing story. It is also one historians treat with caution. Very little contemporary evidence confirms the romance exactly as later generations described it. Like many tales surrounding famous pirates, the story grew larger with time. What can be stated with confidence is that Bellamy entered the world of piracy around 1716, a period when the Golden Age was rapidly gaining momentum. He first sailed alongside experienced pirate captains, including Henry Jennings and Benjamin Hornigold. These men had already spent years navigating Caribbean waters, learning which trade routes carried the richest cargo and which islands offered temporary refuge. Bellamy proved to be an exceptional sailor. He learned quickly. He understood navigation. He inspired confidence among his fellow crew members. Before long, he had earned command of his own ship. That vessel would become one of the most famous pirate ships in history. Its name was the Woodard galley. Originally built in England in 1715, the Woodard had been designed specifically for the Atlantic slave trade. It carried enslaved Africans across the ocean before transporting valuable goods such as sugar, indigo, and precious metals back toward Europe. Like many ships operating within that brutal commercial system, it generated enormous profits while contributing to immense human suffering. In February 1717, Bellamy captured the Woodard near the Bahamas. Recognizing its excellent speed and strength, he transformed it into his flagship. Dozens of additional cannons were installed. The ship became one of the most heavily armed pirate vessels of its day. Its spacious design allowed Bellamy to command a large crew while carrying substantial captured cargo. Yet Bellamy's growing reputation differed noticeably from that of Blackbeard. Several contemporary accounts suggest that Bellamy preferred cooperation whenever possible. Merchant crews who surrendered peacefully often avoided unnecessary bloodshed. Violence remained part of piracy. There is no denying that, but Bellamy appears to have believed that intimidation usually achieved better results than slaughter. One remarkable quotation, recorded years later by Captain Charles Johnson, captures this attitude. Although historians cannot verify every word with certainty, Bellamy is said to have declared that wealthy merchants often became rich by exploiting the labor of ordinary people, while pirates simply took by force what powerful men had accumulated through unfair systems. Whether those exact words were spoken or slightly altered over time, they reveal an important historical truth. Some pirates viewed themselves not merely as criminals but as men rebelling against a deeply unequal world. Modern historians are careful not to romanticize these beliefs. Pirates still robbed innocent people. They threatened lives. They operated outside the law. Yet understanding how they justified their actions helps explain why so many sailors willingly joined them. By the spring of 1717, Bellamy had become one of the Atlantic's most successful pirate captains. His fleet captured numerous merchant vessels carrying sugar, wine, silver coins, textiles, and everyday supplies. Each successful prize strengthened his reputation. Each voyage also increased the attention of colonial authorities eager to suppress piracy. Ironically, Bellamy's greatest enemy would not be a naval officer. It would not be another pirate. It would be weather. On April 26, 1717, the Woodard galley sailed northward along the coast of New England. Bellamy may have intended to return toward Cape Cod. Some historians believe he hoped to see Maria Hallett once more, though this remains impossible to prove. The ship carried enormous wealth collected during months of successful piracy. Gold coins, silver pieces of 8, jewelry, trade goods, weapons. Every item represented another captured merchant voyage somewhere across the Atlantic. As evening approached, conditions began changing. The wind strengthened. Dark clouds gathered across the horizon. Experienced sailors immediately recognized the warning. Atlantic storms could develop with astonishing speed. Unlike modern mariners, Bellamy's crew possessed no weather forecasts. Only observation. Only experience, only hope. The storm intensified through the night. Towering waves struck the hull repeatedly. Rain reduced visibility almost to nothing. Powerful wind shredded sails and pushed the heavily loaded ship toward the dangerous shoals off Cape Cod. The crew fought desperately. Anchors were prepared. Rigging was adjusted. Commands echoed through darkness filled with wind and crashing water. It was not enough. Shortly after midnight, the Woodard struck a sandbar. The impact threw men from their feet. Massive waves continued driving the vessel farther onto the shoal. The hull began breaking apart. Water flooded below deck. Cannons, cargo, timber, and men were tossed violently as the sea tore the great ship to pieces. There was almost no chance of survival. Out of roughly 146 people aboard, only 2 are believed to have survived the wreck. Samuel Bellamy was not among them. At approximately 28 years of age, one of the most successful pirate captains of the Golden Age disappeared beneath the cold Atlantic waters. His career had lasted little more than a year. Yet during that brief time, he had captured dozens of ships and amassed extraordinary wealth. Most of it vanished with him. For more than 2.5 centuries, the Woodard remained hidden beneath shifting sands off Cape Cod. Many believed the legendary pirate ship would never be found. Then, in 1984, underwater explorer Barry Clifford discovered the wreck site after years of searching. Archaeologists later recovered thousands of artifacts from the seabed: cannons, pistols, navigational instruments, coins from many different nations, jewelry, trade goods, and personal belongings that had rested beneath the ocean since 1717. The Woodard remains the only authenticated pirate shipwreck from the Golden Age of Piracy ever discovered. Those remarkable discoveries transformed our understanding of pirate life. Instead of relying solely on legends, historians could finally examine objects that pirates had actually touched, used, repaired, traded, and carried aboard their ships. The sea, which had hidden Bellamy's final voyage for centuries, had quietly preserved one of history's greatest archaeological time capsules. And while storms claimed Bellamy, another pirate was preparing to leave an entirely different mark on history, not through overwhelming victories or terrifying battles, but by becoming one of the very few women whose name would forever stand alongside the greatest captains of the Golden Age. Her name was Bonny. By the early 18th century, life at sea was considered almost entirely a man's world. Merchant ships, naval vessels, fishing boats, and privateers were overwhelmingly crewed by men. Long voyages demanded exhausting physical labor, harsh discipline, and months away from home. Society expected women to remain on land, and many maritime regulations discouraged or even prohibited women from serving aboard ships. Yet history has a way of producing remarkable exceptions. One of the most famous was Bonny. Unlike Blackbeard or Bart Roberts, Bonny's story survives only in fragments. Many details remain uncertain because official records are limited, and later writers often mixed fact with legend. Historians therefore distinguish carefully between what can be documented and what likely grew through generations of storytelling. Most evidence suggests that Bonny was born around 1697, probably near Cork in Ireland. Her father, William Cormac, was a lawyer who later moved with his family to the British colony of South Carolina in North America. By colonial standards, the family became relatively prosperous, and grew up in circumstances very different from those of many sailors who later turned to piracy. Contemporary accounts consistently describe Anne as intelligent, determined, and unwilling to accept the strict expectations placed upon women of her time. According to several early sources, she possessed a fiery temper and strong independence. While some stories about her youth cannot be verified, there is little doubt that she refused to fit comfortably into the narrow social roles expected in 18th-century colonial society. As a young woman, Anne married a sailor named James Bonny. The marriage proved unsuccessful. James reportedly became involved with authorities attempting to identify pirates in the Bahamas, while Anne herself became increasingly drawn toward the lively and unpredictable community developing around Nassau. There she met a man whose life would soon become closely connected with her own. His name was John Rackham. History remembers him by a far more familiar nickname, Calico Jack. Rackham earned that nickname because he reportedly favored brightly colored calico clothing, an imported cotton fabric that stood out among the more practical garments worn by ordinary sailors. Unlike Blackbeard, whose terrifying appearance inspired fear, or Roberts, whose remarkable tactical success built his reputation, Rackham became famous largely because of the extraordinary people who sailed beside him. He had once served as quartermaster under another pirate captain, Charles Vane. In pirate crews, the quartermaster held significant authority, representing the interests of ordinary sailors and helping distribute captured goods according to agreed shares. When disagreements arose within Vane's crew after an unsuccessful encounter with a French warship, the pirates voted. They removed Vane from command. John Rackham became the new captain. This election illustrates once again one of piracy's unusual characteristics. Leadership often depended upon the confidence of the crew rather than hereditary rank or royal appointment. Rackham's career, however, would become memorable for another reason. And Bonny joined him. Exactly how she first began sailing remains uncertain, but contemporary accounts agree that she left her previous life behind and became part of Rackham's crew. To avoid immediate recognition, some reports claim she initially dressed in men's clothing while aboard ship. Such disguises were not entirely unheard of during this period. Throughout military and maritime history, a number of women concealed their identities in order to serve in occupations officially closed to them. Eventually, however, many members of the crew appear to have known who she really was. Rather than objecting, they accepted her abilities, and was no passenger. Historical accounts consistently describe her as an active participant during pirate operations. She carried weapons. She fought when necessary. She shared the risks faced by every other member of the crew. Around this same time, another remarkable figure entered the story. Her name was Mary Red. Like in Bonny, Mary's early life contains many uncertainties. According to the most widely accepted accounts, she had spent much of her youth disguised as a boy after the death of her older brother. The disguise reportedly helped her family continue receiving financial support from relatives. As she grew older, Mary continued living under male identities for practical reasons. She worked as a sailor. She reportedly served as a soldier in Europe during the War of the Spanish Succession. Only later did she eventually become involved with piracy. Whether every detail of this remarkable journey occurred exactly as later writers described remains difficult to prove. Nevertheless, multiple contemporary sources agree that Mary Read eventually joined Rackham's crew and fought alongside Bonny. The presence of two women serving openly within the same pirate crew fascinated both contemporaries and later historians. Their stories challenged assumptions about gender roles in the 18th century. Yet it is important not to exaggerate their circumstances. Neither Anne nor Mary transformed piracy into an equal society. Women remained extraordinarily rare aboard pirate ships. Their experiences stood out precisely because they were exceptional. Meanwhile, Rackham's crew continued attacking merchant vessels around the Caribbean. Compared with Bart Roberts or Blackbeard, their captures were relatively modest. They seized small coastal traders and lightly defended ships rather than enormous treasure fleets. The British government, however, cared little about the size of their prizes. Piracy remained piracy. Colonial governors continued issuing orders for their capture. One of those governors was Woodard Rogers, the former privateer appointed governor of the Bahamas. Rogers arrived determined to restore royal authority to Nassau. He offered pardons to pirates willing to surrender peacefully. Those refusing the king's mercy became fugitives. Rackham briefly accepted a pardon. For a short period, he appeared willing to abandon piracy. Yet peaceful life offered neither the excitement nor the income that many former pirates had become accustomed to. Before long, Rackham returned to sea. His renewed career proved remarkably short. On the night of October 22, 1720, while sailing near Jamaica, Rackham's vessel encountered a government ship commanded by Captain Jonathan Barnett. Darkness covered the sea. Escape might still have been possible. Instead, the government vessel closed the distance rapidly. A brief but decisive battle followed. Several contemporary accounts report that many of Rackham's male crew members had been drinking heavily before the attack and were unable to organize an effective defense. Bonny and Mary Read reportedly urged the men to fight. Some accounts even claim the two women continued resisting after many of their companions had retreated below deck. Whether every dramatic detail can be confirmed remains uncertain. What is beyond dispute is the outcome. Rackham's crew was captured. They were taken to Spanish town Jamaica, where they stood trial before a colonial court. The verdict reflected Britain's increasingly determined campaign against piracy. John Rackham was found guilty. He was sentenced to death. On November 18, 1720, he was executed by hanging. His body was later displayed in chains near the harbor as a warning to others considering the pirate life. And Bonny and Mary Red were also convicted. Yet their fate unexpectedly changed after the trial. Both women declared that they were pregnant. Under English law, the execution of pregnant prisoners was postponed. The court accepted their claims. Mary Red remained imprisoned, where she likely died from illness in 1721, probably fever. And Bonny's story becomes far less certain after this point. No reliable contemporary record clearly documents what happened next. Some historians believe her influential father secured her release. Others suggest she quietly returned to private life in the American colonies. Unlike many famous pirates, her final years remain one of history's enduring mysteries. As and Bonny disappears from the surviving records, so too does much of the Golden Age itself. The great pirate era was beginning to fade. The Royal Navy tightened its grip on the Atlantic. Colonial governments coordinated their efforts more effectively than ever before. And the scattered republic of outlaws that had once flourished across Caribbean waters found itself running out of places to hide. The disappearance of famous pirates did not happen all at once. There was no single battle that ended the Golden Age of Piracy, no dramatic declaration announcing that the era had come to a close. Instead, the change unfolded slowly, almost quietly, over several years. One pirate captain was captured. Another accepted a royal pardon. A third was lost in a storm. Gradually, the names that had once frightened merchants from Jamaica to London began disappearing from official reports. Governments had learned valuable lessons. During the late 17th century, piracy had flourished partly because European nations were constantly at war with one another. Their attention had been divided. Naval resources were stretched thin across enormous oceans, and colonial governors often lacked the soldiers, ships, or money needed to enforce the law consistently. By the 1720s, that situation had changed. Britain in particular began investing much more heavily in protecting maritime trade. The Royal Navy expanded its presence throughout the Caribbean and along the eastern coast of North America. Permanent naval stations allowed warships to remain in the region instead of returning regularly to Europe. This seemingly simple change made an enormous difference. Pirates depended on distance. If naval ships took weeks to respond, pirates could disappear long before anyone arrived. Now warships were often only days away. Merchant captains also became more cautious. Instead of sailing alone whenever possible, valuable cargoes increasingly traveled in convoys. Groups of merchant vessels protected by naval escorts proved far more difficult for pirates to attack successfully. The economics of piracy slowly began working against the pirates themselves. Successful attacks became less frequent. Long periods without capturing prizes placed enormous pressure on pirate crews. Food supplies diminished. Ships required repairs. Gunpowder became expensive. Crew members grew restless. Without regular victories, morale declined. Another powerful weapon used by governments was the royal pardon. King George I offered many pirates the opportunity to surrender voluntarily and avoid execution. Colonial governors throughout the Americas publicized these pardons widely. Some pirates accepted because they genuinely wished to leave their dangerous lives behind. Others accepted only temporarily before returning to sea. Still, every crew that surrendered meant fewer experienced sailors available for piracy. The movement slowly weakened from within. At the same time, colonial authorities improved communication between distant settlements. Reports of pirate sightings traveled more efficiently than before. Governors exchanged letters. Merchant companies shared intelligence. Naval commanders coordinated patrol routes. Pirates who once relied upon surprise increasingly found that officials already knew where they had recently been seen. Technology had not changed dramatically. Organization had. That alone proved enough. Meanwhile, the world economy itself continued expanding. Ports that had once been little more than scattered colonial settlements became busy commercial centers. Kingston in Jamaica grew into one of Britain's most important Caribbean ports. Charleston expanded steadily. Boston, Philadelphia, and New York all increased in size and importance. As legitimate trade became more profitable, colonial governments gained stronger financial reasons to protect shipping. Pirates threatened taxes. They threatened commerce. Most importantly, they threatened confidence. Merchants invested only when they believed cargo could reach its destination safely. Insurance companies carefully calculated every voyage. If piracy remained widespread, trade slowed. Governments understood that secure sea routes meant greater prosperity. The campaign against piracy therefore became more than simply catching criminals. It became an economic necessity. Yet while official records increasingly celebrated naval victories, ordinary sailors often remembered pirates differently. Many merchant seamen still complained about cruel captains, delayed wages, and harsh discipline. The conditions that had encouraged some men to become pirates had not disappeared completely. Life at sea remained brutally difficult. Storms still wrecked ships. Disease still spread through cramped quarters. Food remained poor on many voyages. Long months away from home continued testing even the strongest crews. In that sense, the Golden Age ended without solving every problem that had helped create it. Another reason piracy declined involved geography. Safe havens gradually disappeared. Nassau, once famous as a gathering place for pirate crews, changed dramatically after the arrival of Governor Woodes Rogers in 1718. Rogers was not merely a military leader. He was also a former privateer who understood exactly how pirates thought. Instead of relying only on force, he combined pardons with determined enforcement. Fortifications were repaired. Local government became stronger. Trade resumed. Pirates found the harbor increasingly hostile. One by one they looked elsewhere. Many never found another refuge as useful. The Caribbean itself became more closely connected to imperial administration. New forts guarded important harbors. Customs officials monitored shipping more carefully. Local militias expanded. No single measure ended piracy. Together, they steadily reduced the opportunities that pirates had once exploited. Even so, piracy never vanished entirely. Long after the Golden Age ended, isolated acts of piracy continued in different parts of the world. The Mediterranean had known pirates for thousands of years. The Indian Ocean still witnessed attacks on merchant shipping. Waters near Southeast Asia occasionally experienced piracy as well. The difference was scale. The remarkable concentration of famous pirate captains operating across the Atlantic between roughly 1716 and 1726 had come to an end. Historians generally describe this brief decade as the heart of the Golden Age. It lasted only about 10 years. Yet its influence on popular imagination has endured for more than 3 centuries. Why? Part of the answer lies in storytelling. Almost immediately after piracy declined, writers began transforming real events into dramatic tales. In 1724, a book titled A General History of the Pirates, published under the name Captain Charles Johnson, gathered biographies of many famous pirates. Scholars continued debating the author's true identity, but the book became enormously influential. It mixed documented events with colorful anecdotes, vivid dialogue, and dramatic descriptions. Many details repeated today first became widely known through its pages. Later generations built upon those stories. 19th-century adventure novels added buried treasure maps, deserted islands, talking parrots, peg legs, and mysterious sea chests. Perhaps the most influential was Robert Louis Stevenson's 1883 novel Treasure Island. Although fictional, it permanently shaped the world's image of pirates. Characters such as Long John Silver introduced ideas that many people now assume were historically common. In reality, most pirates never buried treasure. Very few owned parrots. Eye patches, wooden legs, and hooks certainly existed among injured sailors, but they were not universal pirate symbols. Hollywood continued the transformation during the 20th century. Films emphasized sword fights, dramatic sea battles, hidden treasure, and romantic adventure. These stories entertained millions, but they often blurred the line between history and legend. The real Golden Age of Piracy was shorter, harsher, and far less glamorous. Most pirates died young. Few became wealthy for long. Almost none escaped the constant dangers of disease, storms, betrayal, and the law. Yet understanding the truth does not make their history less fascinating. If anything, it makes it more remarkable. These were real people living through extraordinary times, shaped by global trade, imperial rivalry, economic hardship, and the unforgiving Atlantic Ocean. They were neither mythical heroes nor simple villains. They were products of the world they inhabited. And as the last great pirate cruise disappeared from history, another legacy quietly remained behind. Not hidden beneath tropical beaches and forgotten treasure chests, but preserved in old court records, shipwrecks, sailors' journals, archaeological discoveries, and the countless stories that generations would continue telling whenever they looked out across the sea and wondered what might once have sailed beyond the horizon. As the last pirate ships disappeared from the busiest trade routes, the stories did not disappear with them. If anything, they grew. Across the ports of England, Scotland, Ireland, and the American colonies, sailors gathered in taverns after long voyages, exchanging news over mugs of ale and bowls of stew. Every harbor had its storytellers. Some had truly encountered pirates at sea. Others repeated tales they had heard from shipmates who claimed to know someone who had survived an attack. Each telling added another detail. A captain who had worn 2 pistols suddenly carried 6. A battle that lasted 20 minutes became an all-day fight. A chest containing a few hundred silver coins slowly transformed into a mountain of buried treasure. This was not unusual. Long before newspapers became common, and long before photography could preserve events exactly as they happened, history often traveled by word of mouth. Stories naturally changed as they passed from one person to another. Some became legends, others became myths. Yet hidden beneath those embellishments remained a foundation of real history. One of the greatest myths concerns pirate treasure. Ask almost anyone today to imagine a pirate, and they are likely to picture a weathered map marked with a large red X, leading to a chest overflowing with gold coins, sparkling jewels, and silver goblets buried beneath a lonely palm tree. The image is unforgettable. It is also largely fictional. Historians have found remarkably little evidence that pirates of the Golden Age regularly buried treasure. The reason is surprisingly practical. Pirates needed money constantly. Food had to be purchased. Ships required repairs. Gunpowder, cannonballs, rope, sails, timber, and fresh water all cost money. Crew members expected their shares after a successful capture. There was little advantage in burying wealth that might never be recovered. Even more importantly, much of the cargo pirates captured was not treasure in the modern sense. Merchant ships commonly carried sugar, tobacco, indigo, cotton, silk, coffee, grain, flour, timber, leather, iron tools, medicine, livestock, paper, candles. Everyday trade goods often proved more valuable than chests filled with coins. These cargoes had to be sold quickly before they spoiled or lost value. A pirate's success depended upon commerce just as much as theft. Another familiar image is the parrot sitting proudly on a pirate's shoulder. Parrots certainly existed throughout the Caribbean. European sailors frequently encountered brilliantly colored macaws and parrots during voyages to tropical islands. Some exotic birds were purchased and transported back to Europe because wealthy families admired unusual animals. So, could a pirate have owned a parrot? Certainly. Did every pirate? Almost certainly not. Life aboard a crowded wooden ship offered little comfort for either sailors or birds. Fresh water was limited. Food was carefully rationed. Every extra mouth required additional supplies. The famous shoulder parrot belongs more to literature than to documented history. The same can be said for the phrase, "walk the plank." It has become one of the most recognizable pirate punishments in popular culture. Yet surprisingly, historical evidence for its widespread use during the Golden Age is extremely limited. Pirates sometimes executed prisoners. Some abandoned people on isolated islands, a punishment known as marooning. Others simply released captured crews after taking cargo. Forcing prisoners to walk a plank projecting over the sea appears far more often in later fiction than in contemporary records. Real pirates generally preferred methods that required less ceremony. Even the famous Black Flag deserves closer examination. People often refer to every pirate banner as the Jolly Roger. The exact origin of that name remains uncertain. Historians have proposed several theories. One suggestion connects it to the French expression Jolie Rouge, meaning pretty red, referring to earlier red flags that sometimes signaled no mercy. Another possibility is that the name evolved gradually through English slang. No single explanation has gained universal acceptance. What is certain is that pirate flags varied enormously. There was no official design. Bart Roberts used different flags during his career. Blackbeard's banner, commonly reproduced today with a horned skeleton holding an hourglass, is itself debated among historians because surviving contemporary evidence is limited. Many pirate captains simply created their own symbols. The goal was recognition. A distinctive flag could frighten merchant crews into surrendering without a fight. Psychological warfare often proved more valuable than cannon fire. Then there is the eye patch. Popular illustrations almost always include one. Some sailors certainly lost eyes during combat or accidents. Flying splinters from cannon fire could cause devastating injuries. Rigging accidents were common. Knife fights and pistol shots made permanent scars inevitable. However, there is another interesting theory. Some maritime historians have suggested that sailors occasionally wore an eye patch over one healthy eye, so it remained adjusted to darkness below deck. By switching the patch to the other eye before descending into dim spaces, they could see more quickly without waiting for their vision to adapt. Whether this practice was widespread during the Golden Age remains debated, but it illustrates how practical explanations sometimes replace romantic legends. Life at sea encouraged practicality above all else. Even pirate speech has been transformed by fiction. The familiar expressions, "Ahoy, matey!" or "Ar!" owe much of their popularity to later stage performances, novels, and 20th century films. Real pirate crews came from many different countries. An English sailor from Bristol sounded different from one raised in London. Scottish, Irish, Welsh, Dutch, French, Portuguese, and African sailors all brought their own accents and vocabulary aboard ship. A pirate vessel was often multilingual. Communication relied as much upon gestures, experience, and shared maritime terminology as upon any single accent. Perhaps the most remarkable difference between myth and reality concerns daily life. Adventure stories often leap from one exciting battle to another. Real pirate voyages were mostly filled with waiting. Waiting for favorable winds. Waiting for merchant ships. Waiting for storms to pass. Waiting while carpenters repaired damaged masts. Waiting while leaking hulls were patched. Waiting while fresh water was collected ashore. Weeks might pass without a single encounter. The ocean was vast. Ships were comparatively few. Patience became one of the most important skills any successful captain possessed. When action finally arrived, it was often sudden and frightening. Minutes of violence interrupted months of routine. Then the waiting began again. Modern archaeology has helped separate these realities from fiction. The excavation of the Woodard galley revealed ordinary objects alongside weapons and treasure. Buttons, shoes, cooking utensils, navigation instruments, medical equipment, simple personal belongings. These discoveries remind us that pirates were ordinary human beings living extraordinary lives. They worked, argued, laughed, suffered illness, repaired broken clothing, sharpened tools, cleaned weapons. The romance came later. The reality was far more demanding. Yet perhaps that reality is even more compelling. Because behind every famous pirate name stood a real person trying to survive in one of history's most dangerous professions. And while legends continued growing larger on land, the Atlantic Ocean quietly kept many of its greatest secrets beneath the waves, waiting centuries for archaeologists, historians, and explorers to uncover pieces of a forgotten world that had never truly disappeared. Those forgotten worlds beneath the sea remained silent for generations. When the Golden Age of Piracy finally came to an end, the Atlantic Ocean did not suddenly become peaceful. Merchant ships continued crossing the same waters. Royal Navy vessels still patrolled familiar routes. Fishing boats sailed from small coastal villages each morning just as they always had. Only the famous pirate captains were gone. The sea itself remembered everything. Every storm that shattered a mast. Every anchor dropped into a hidden bay. Every cannon fired across rolling waves. Every ship that vanished without reaching its destination. Unlike history books, the ocean preserved its own archive. For centuries no one could read it. When a wooden ship sank during the 18th century, survivors rarely knew its exact resting place. Ocean currents carried wreckage far from the original disaster. Sand shifted across the seabed year after year. Coral slowly grew over cannons and anchors. Iron rusted. Timber softened beneath salt water. Entire ships disappeared beneath layers of sediment, as though history itself had gently tucked them away. Families often waited in vain. A merchant vessel leaving London for Jamaica might simply fail to return. There was no radio, no telegraph, no satellite. Months later, relatives might still watch the harbor, hoping a familiar sail would finally appear on the horizon. Sometimes it never did. The ship had simply become another mystery of the Atlantic. Pirate vessels disappeared in exactly the same way. Many famous ships are known only through scattered written records. Historians know they existed because government documents mention them. Merchants filed complaints about attacks, or court records described captured crews. The ships themselves, however, vanished beneath the sea. Until archaeology changed everything. Modern underwater archaeology is patient work. It bears little resemblance to the dramatic treasure hunts shown in adventure films. Researchers begin by studying old shipping records, naval reports, weather accounts, insurance documents, and 18th century maps. They compare dozens, sometimes hundreds, of historical sources before searching a single stretch of coastline. Even then, success is never guaranteed. The ocean is constantly changing. Storms move sand. Currents expose one artifact while burying another. Visibility underwater may shrink to only a few feet. Divers often work by touch as much as by sight. Every discovery requires extraordinary care. An object resting underwater for 300 years cannot simply be lifted onto a boat. Wood begins drying immediately. Metal reacts with oxygen. Leather and fabric may deteriorate rapidly once exposed. Conservation often takes years longer than excavation itself. One artifact can require thousands of hours of careful preservation before historians fully understand what it reveals. Among the greatest archaeological discoveries connected with piracy remains the wreck of the Woodard galley. When underwater explorer Barry Clifford located the site in 1984, historians gained something remarkably rare. Not another legend, not another diary, a real pirate ship. Thousands of recovered artifacts painted a vivid picture of everyday pirate life. There were iron cannons of various sizes, lead musket balls, flintlock pistols, navigation dividers, compasses, cooking pots blackened by years of use, coins from England, Spain, Portugal, France, and several American colonies, jewelry, trade weights, medical instruments. Even children's objects appeared among the wreckage, reminding researchers that merchant ships, and sometimes pirate prizes, carried far more than armed sailors alone. Each recovered object answered one question while raising another. Why were coins from so many nations found together? Because piracy targeted international trade. Why were medical instruments so carefully stored? Because disease threatened every voyage. Why were ordinary tools preserved alongside valuable cargo? Because survival at sea depended more upon practical equipment than luxury. The archaeology confirmed what many historians had long suspected. Real pirate ships functioned as working communities. Every person aboard contributed to keeping the vessel afloat. Carpenters repaired hulls. Coopers maintained water barrels. Sailmakers patched torn canvas. Cooks prepared simple meals from limited supplies. Gunners cleaned cannons constantly to prevent corrosion. The sea demanded continuous work. It never allowed long periods of comfort. Another remarkable archaeological project concerns Blackbeard's flagship, Queen Anne's Revenge. After running aground near Beaufort Inlet in North Carolina during 1718, the ship rested beneath shallow coastal waters for centuries. In 1996, archaeologists confirmed the wreck site. Excavations have continued for many years. Researchers recovered dozens of cannons, anchors, surgical tools, pewter plates, navigational instruments, fragments of rigging, and even tiny gold flakes trapped within sediment. One particularly fascinating discovery involved medical equipment. The collection suggested that treating illness and injury occupied a far more important place aboard pirate ships than popular culture often recognizes. Broken bones, knife wounds, gunshot injuries, infections, tropical diseases, scurvy. Medical care remained limited by 18th century knowledge, but every experienced crew understood its importance. Without healthy sailors, no ship could survive for long. Archaeology has also corrected misunderstandings about pirate wealth. Treasure certainly existed. Spanish silver coins have been recovered. Gold jewelry appears among several discoveries. Yet most recovered cargo reflects ordinary commerce rather than fairy tale riches. Iron bars, glass bottles, ceramic dishes, lead shot, trade goods, practical supplies. The Atlantic economy depended upon everyday objects moving continuously between continents. Pirates interrupted that system. They did not exist outside it. One especially moving aspect of underwater archaeology is its connection to individual human lives. A simple shoe resting on the seabed reminds us that someone once wore it while climbing wet rigging. Pipe suggests quiet moments between watches. A spoon recalls ordinary meals eaten beneath swinging lanterns. These objects belong to people who laughed, argued, worried, and hoped, just as people do today. History becomes easier to understand when viewed through such personal belongings. The ocean preserves these silent witnesses with remarkable patience. Even now, researchers believe thousands of shipwrecks connected to the 17th and 18th centuries remain undiscovered across the Atlantic. Some lie beneath deep water, impossible to reach until modern technology advanced. Others remain hidden beneath constantly shifting sand. New discoveries continue appearing almost every year. Each one slightly changes our understanding of the past. Meanwhile, historians continue comparing archaeological evidence with written records. Court documents describe captured cargo. Excavated artifacts confirm, or occasionally contradict, those descriptions. Letters written by colonial governors mention damaged ships. Recovered wrecks sometimes explain exactly how those vessels met their end. The conversation between history and archaeology continues growing richer with every expedition. Perhaps the greatest lesson these discoveries teach is one of humility. Legends are exciting. Reality is often quieter. Yet reality possesses a depth that legends rarely achieve. A worn compass, a repaired cooking pot, a carefully stitched shoe. These ordinary objects reveal lives far more completely than exaggerated tales of buried treasure ever could. They remind us that the Golden Age of Piracy was not simply a collection of famous names. It was a chapter in the everyday history of thousands of sailors, merchants, enslaved people, naval officers, dockworkers, craftsmen, and families whose lives were shaped by the Atlantic Ocean. And as archaeologists continue uncovering pieces of that vanished world, another question quietly emerges. If the history has become clearer than ever before, why do pirates still capture our imagination more than 3 centuries later? The answer lies not only in what they did, but in what they came to represent long after their ships had disappeared beyond the horizon. Long after the last famous pirate had been captured, executed, pardoned, or lost at sea, their memory continued sailing across the world's imagination. That may seem surprising at first. After all, the Golden Age of Piracy was remarkably short. Historians generally place its height between 1716 and 1726, barely a decade. Compared with the Roman Empire, the Middle Ages, or the Age of Exploration, it was only a brief moment in history. Yet that brief moment has lasted for centuries in popular culture. Why? Part of the answer lies in something deeply human. People have always been fascinated by those who lived outside ordinary society. Throughout history, stories have celebrated explorers crossing unknown oceans, mountain climbers reaching impossible peaks, and travelers venturing into dangerous frontiers. Pirates occupied a strange place within that tradition. They were not heroes in the historical sense, nor were they simply ordinary criminals. They lived beyond the boundaries of governments, challenging some of the richest trading empires of their age. That made them unforgettable. The sea itself also played an important role. Unlike castles, battlefields, or ancient cities, the ocean hides much of its history. When a medieval fortress falls into ruin, people can still walk among its stones centuries later. When a ship sinks beneath hundreds or thousands of feet of water, it often disappears from human sight entirely. Mystery naturally fills those empty spaces. People wonder what remains below. Old anchors, cannons, letters, personal belongings. Entire ships resting silently beneath layers of sand. The unknown encourages imagination. Then there is the power of storytelling. In the decades immediately following the Golden Age, newspapers, pamphlets, and books began turning real pirate lives into dramatic adventures. Sailors returning from long voyages shared stories in taverns across England, Scotland, Ireland, and the American colonies. Some accounts were accurate. Others became slightly exaggerated. With each retelling, reality blended a little more closely with legend. By the 19th century, fiction had transformed piracy almost completely. Writers no longer focused only on historical events. Instead, they explored timeless themes: freedom, adventure, greed, loyalty, betrayal, courage, fear. A pirate ship became more than a wooden vessel. It became a floating stage upon which these universal human emotions could unfold. One of the greatest examples came in 1883, when Scottish author Robert Louis Stevenson published Treasure Island. The novel introduced generations of readers to Long John Silver, treasure maps marked with a mysterious X, secret islands, mutiny, and hidden gold. Stevenson drew inspiration from real maritime history, but his story was fiction. It was never intended to serve as a historical record. Nevertheless, its influence proved enormous. Many modern ideas about pirates trace directly back to that single novel. The 20th century carried those ideas even further. Radio dramas brought pirate adventures into family living rooms. Hollywood films added spectacular sword fights, dramatic cannon battles, tropical islands, and colorful costumes. Later television series and video games expanded the mythology again. Each generation reshaped pirates according to its own imagination. Sometimes history remained recognizable. Sometimes it disappeared almost entirely beneath entertainment. Interestingly, professional historians have not tried to destroy these legends. Instead, they have worked patiently to separate myth from documented evidence. The myths themselves tell an important story. They reveal how different generations imagined courage, rebellion, and freedom. The historical facts reveal something equally valuable. They show what life at sea was actually like during one of the most dangerous periods in Atlantic history. The contrast between those two versions, the legendary pirate and the real sailor, is fascinating in its own right. Modern museums have helped bridge that gap. Visitors can now stand only a few feet away from cannons recovered from Queen Anne's Revenge. They can examine coins raised from the wreck of the Woodard galley. They can see navigational instruments, pistols, swords, cooking utensils, and personal belongings that once crossed the Atlantic aboard pirate ships. Suddenly, history feels tangible. These are not movie props. They are real objects carried by real people more than 3 centuries ago. Scientific technology continues adding new chapters as well. Marine archaeologists now use side-scan sonar, magnetometers, remotely operated vehicles, and sophisticated mapping systems to explore areas of the seabed that earlier generations could never reach. Digital reconstructions allow historians to rebuild damaged ships virtually, showing how pirate vessels were organized without disturbing fragile archaeological sites. Even climate research occasionally contributes unexpected discoveries. Powerful storms sometimes uncover wrecks buried beneath sand for hundreds of years. Each hurricane that reshapes a coastline can expose another forgotten piece of maritime history. The ocean continues revealing its secrets slowly. Historians also increasingly study piracy within its broader historical setting. Rather than viewing pirates in isolation, researchers examine how they were connected to expanding global trade, European imperial rivalry, naval warfare, colonial government, labor conditions aboard merchant ships, and the transatlantic slave trade. This wider perspective produces a more complete understanding. Pirates did not create the Atlantic world. They emerged because of it. Their existence reflected the opportunities and inequalities of a rapidly changing global economy. That understanding makes the Golden Age more interesting, not less. It reminds us that history rarely consists of isolated events. Everything connects. A peace treaty signed in Europe could leave thousands of sailors unemployed. A shortage of naval patrols in the Caribbean created opportunities for piracy. Growing international trade produced richer targets. Improved government coordination eventually reduced those opportunities. Each development influenced the next. History moved like the tides, sometimes slowly, sometimes suddenly, but always connected. Perhaps the most enduring lesson of the Golden Age is that legends often begin with ordinary people. Blackbeard was once an unknown sailor. Bart Roberts had been a merchant officer. Samuel Bellamy likely crossed the Atlantic seeking opportunity. And Bonny and Mary Red challenged expectations in a society that offered women very limited choices. None of them knew their names would survive for centuries. They simply lived through extraordinary circumstances. Today, visitors walking along the docks of Bristol, Nassau, Charleston, Ocracoke, or Cape Cod may find little visible evidence of the dramatic events that unfolded there more than 300 years ago. The ports are busier. The ships are larger. Engines have replaced sails. Modern navigation depends on satellites instead of stars. Yet the same tides still rise and fall. The same Atlantic winds still sweep across the ocean. The same horizon stretches endlessly toward distant continents. Standing there quietly, it becomes easier to imagine wooden masts appearing far away, white sails catching the morning sun, and sailors scanning the sea with telescopes, never quite knowing whether the approaching ship carried peaceful merchants, or one of the most feared pirate captains of the Golden Age. Only one final voyage now remains in our story, a gentle look back across the entire age before we let the Atlantic grow calm once more. Looking back across the Golden Age of piracy, it becomes clear that history rarely follows the simple paths we imagine. The popular image is easy to remember. A black flag rising above the horizon. Cannons roaring through clouds of smoke. A fearless captain shouting orders from the quarterdeck. A chest overflowing with gold hidden beneath a lonely palm tree. Those images have entertained generations. The real story is quieter. It is also far more remarkable. The Golden Age did not begin because a handful of adventurous men suddenly decided to become pirates. It emerged from a rapidly changing world. European empires stretched across oceans. Trade expanded faster than ever before. Merchant fleets carried extraordinary wealth between continents. Wars trained thousands of experienced sailors, and peace left many of them unemployed. Weak colonial governments struggled to patrol enormous coastlines. All of these circumstances combined to create a brief opening in history. For roughly 10 years, piracy flourished on a scale the Atlantic had never seen before. Then, almost as quickly, that opportunity disappeared. The men and women whose names survived were only a tiny fraction of those who lived through those years. For every famous captain whose story appears in history books, hundreds of ordinary sailors remain anonymous. They climbed rigging before sunrise. They hauled heavy anchors by hand. They repaired leaking hulls in dangerous weather. They crossed oceans without accurate charts or reliable forecasts. Some sailed for merchants. Some served in navies. Some became privateers. Some turned to piracy. Nearly all accepted risks that would seem almost unimaginable today. The Atlantic itself remained the greatest force shaping every decision. No captain, not Blackbeard, Bart Roberts, Samuel Bellamy, and Bonny, John Rackham, or any other, could command the sea. Storms ignored reputation. Hurricanes spared no flag. Hidden reefs showed no loyalty. A single broken mast could transform a successful voyage into a desperate struggle for survival. In many ways, nature proved more powerful than governments or pirates alike. The sea treated everyone equally. That truth appears again and again throughout the historical record. Merchant vessels vanished without warning. Royal Navy warships occasionally disappeared in violent storms. Pirate ships wrecked on sandbars only a few miles from safety. Disease spread without regard for rank or wealth. Fresh water became precious after weeks at sea. Simple repairs often determined whether a crew survived another month. These realities remind us that daily life aboard an 18th-century sailing ship demanded extraordinary endurance. There was very little comfort, very little privacy, very little certainty, yet there was remarkable skill. Navigation relied upon mathematics, observation, and experience accumulated over countless voyages. Sailors read changing winds by watching clouds and waves. They measured the sun's position with simple instruments. At night, the stars became familiar companions guiding ships across thousands of miles of open water. Long before engines, electricity, or radio communication, these mariners connected continents using little more than canvas sails, wooden hulls, rope, and human knowledge. It remains one of history's greatest achievements. The Golden Age of Piracy also reminds us how quickly reputations can grow. Many famous pirates spent only a few years at sea. Blackbeard's career lasted scarcely more than 2 years as an independent captain. Samuel Bellamy commanded the Woodard galley for only a short time before the Atlantic claimed both ship and crew. And Bonny and Mary Red appeared in historical records only briefly before disappearing into uncertainty. John Rackham's command ended within a handful of years. Even Bart Roberts, one of the most successful pirates ever recorded, died before reaching 40 years of age. None enjoyed decades of triumph. Most met remarkably ordinary endings. Cannonball, a musket shot, storm, disease, execution. The legends became much larger than the lives themselves. That contrast between myth and reality makes the Golden Age endlessly fascinating. History shows us ambitious sailors navigating a dangerous world shaped by commerce, empire, war, and survival. Legend transforms those same sailors into symbols of freedom and adventure. Both stories continue existing side by side. One belongs to careful historical research. The other belongs to literature, theater, cinema, and imagination. Neither entirely replaces the other. Instead, together they explain why piracy still captures attention more than 3 centuries later. Today, researchers continue discovering new evidence. Old court documents hidden within archives provide forgotten details. Marine archaeologists recover artifacts from long-lost wrecks. Scientists analyze timber, coins, ceramics, weapons, and navigational instruments to understand daily life more accurately than ever before. History continues growing. It is never completely finished. Every new discovery slightly reshapes our understanding of the past. Perhaps that is the greatest treasure the Golden Age has left behind. Not buried gold. Not jeweled crowns. not mysterious maps. Knowledge. Each recovered artifact, preserved journal, official letter, and archaeological excavation allows us to replace myth with evidence while still appreciating the remarkable stories that first inspired curiosity. And when we look beyond the famous names, another truth quietly appears. The history of piracy is really the history of ordinary people living through extraordinary circumstances. Sailors searching for wages, merchants protecting investments, naval officers enforcing the law, dockworkers loading ships before dawn, shipwrights shaping timber by hand, families waiting anxiously for loved ones to return across the Atlantic. Their lives intersected upon the same ocean. Together, they created one brief chapter that permanently changed maritime history. As the decades passed, larger navies secured trade routes, colonial governments strengthened, commerce expanded, steam engines eventually replaced sails. The age of wooden pirate ships slowly faded into memory. Yet whenever the evening sun reflects across calm water, whenever seabirds circle above an old harbor, or whenever the wind whistles softly through a ship's rigging preserved in a maritime museum, it becomes surprisingly easy to imagine that distant world returning for just a moment. The creaking of timber, the snapping of canvas in a fresh breeze, the steady rhythm of waves against a wooden hull, the endless horizon stretching farther than the eye can see. Somewhere beyond it, history was quietly unfolding, one voyage at a time. And although those voyages ended centuries ago, their echoes still drift gently across the Atlantic, waiting for anyone willing to slow down, listen carefully, and remember the real people who once sailed into one of history's most unforgettable ages. The Atlantic has grown quiet once again. The famous pirate ships are gone. The crowded harbors of Nassau have changed beyond recognition. The great merchant convoys that once carried sugar, tobacco, coffee, silver, and spices no longer rely on towering wooden masts and endless rows of canvas sails. The Royal Navy warships that hunted pirates have long since returned to history. The men and women who lived through the Golden Age have all faded into the distant past. Yet the ocean remains. The same Atlantic that carried Blackbeard, Bart Roberts, Samuel Bellamy, and Bonny, Mary Red, John Rackham, and thousands of ordinary sailors still rises and falls with the tide. The same winds still cross from Europe toward the Americas. The same stars still appear above the open sea. The same moon still casts a silver path across calm water, just as it did more than 300 years ago. History often feels distant because we usually remember only its biggest names. But the Golden Age of Piracy was never only about famous captains. It was about ordinary people. The apprentice sailor leaving home for the first time. The ship's carpenter repairing damaged planks in the middle of a storm. The cook stretching limited food supplies through another long voyage. The navigator patiently measuring the noon sun with worn instruments. The dock worker loading heavy barrels before sunrise. The merchant hoping an expensive cargo would safely reach its destination. The family waiting months for a ship that might never return. Even the naval officer sent to end piracy faced the same unpredictable sea. The Atlantic treated everyone with equal indifference. Kings could not command the wind. Pirates could not bargain with hurricanes. Merchants could not purchase calm seas. Every voyage depended upon skill, patience, courage, and a little good fortune. That may be one reason this chapter of history continues to fascinate us. It reminds us that behind every legend stood a real human life. Blackbeard was not born a legend. He became one through circumstance, reputation, and the stories others told after his death. Bart Roberts never planned to become one of history's most successful pirates. Samuel Bellamy's remarkable career lasted little more than a year before ending beneath the waves. And Bonny and Mary Red challenged expectations in ways that still surprise historians today. Their lives were short. Their choices were difficult. Their world was uncertain. History remembers them because they lived during an extraordinary moment when politics, trade, war, and the sea combined to create something unique. For only a brief decade, piracy reached a scale never seen before in the Atlantic. Then the tides changed. Governments became stronger. Trade routes became better protected. The opportunities that had allowed piracy to flourish slowly disappeared. The Golden Age ended not with one final battle, but with hundreds of small changes that gradually restored control over the world's busiest shipping lanes. And still the stories endured. Books carried them into the 19th century. Adventure novels transformed them into legends. Films gave them faces. Museums revealed their real belongings. Archaeologists recovered their ships from beneath layers of sand and salt water. Historians patiently compared myths with surviving documents, allowing us to understand these remarkable lives more clearly than ever before. Today, when we picture a pirate ship crossing the horizon, we often imagine excitement and adventure. The truth was quieter, harder, colder, far more exhausting. Wooden decks needed constant repair. Food spoiled. Fresh water became precious. Storms arrived without warning. Disease spread quickly. Many sailors never lived long enough to grow old. Yet despite every hardship, they crossed oceans that connected continents and reshaped the world. Their voyages became part of the larger story of global history. Perhaps that is the real treasure left behind by the Golden Age of Piracy. Not buried chests of gold. Not mysterious islands marked on faded maps. But a deeper understanding of the people who lived, worked, struggled, and sometimes broke the law during one of history's most fascinating maritime eras. Their ships disappeared. Their ports changed. Their world passed into memory. But the lessons remain. History is rarely as simple as legend. Real people are always more complicated than the stories told about them. And the sea remembers everything. If you could stand quietly on the cliffs overlooking the Atlantic tonight, close your eyes for a moment and simply listen. You might imagine the distant creak of timber carried by the wind, the soft flutter of canvas catching a gentle breeze, the rhythmic splash of waves against a weathered wooden hull, the faint call of seabirds circling above a harbor just before sunrise. Those sounds are older than empires, older than pirate legends. They have echoed across these waters for countless generations. Thank you for spending this peaceful journey through the real history of the Golden Age of Piracy with me. I truly appreciate your time, and I hope you found the quieter human side of this remarkable era just as fascinating as the legends. Now let your shoulders relax. Take one slow, deep breath in, and gently breathe out. Allow the noise of the day to drift away like a ship disappearing beyond the horizon. Close your eyes if you're ready. Let your thoughts become as calm as the moonlit sea. And may the steady rhythm of the ocean carry you gently into a peaceful night's sleep. Good night, sweet dreams. And until our next journey through history, may calm seas always find you.